times police aren't messing around, because they were clearly saying we have to get order back, and we're going to do what we must in order for
Okay,
that to
we're
happen.
back,
These
and now
protesters,
we're
of course,
watching
feel
Carrie
very
11
strongly
News
that
on
in order for their
the
message to get
arrest
heard, they
of
have to be
the
disruptive.
protesters.
And
So
people feel strongly on both sides of that issue, but
is
that is why
after
they're out
is
tonight. They have a
after
message they want people to hear, and they feel unless they
is
are
after
disruptive,
8 o'clock.
that
So
people
now
won't listen. I
what you're
obviously can't
watching
speak for all of them,
is
but
this is the
those I have spoken
Capitol
to in community
in
activists, there are many that share that belief. So that's what we're seeing play out. And again, we really have had so many
I'm
nights
gonna
of
let her do
unrest
her
here,
job.
confrontations between police officers and protesters, and yet we have seen so little violence as far as inflicted on individual people. And so that is something that we can all be thankful for tonight, and really hope and pray continues through tonight as well.
Danny, I kind of feel bad, Danny, that you were right in the about to show us this march in St. Paul of very peaceful protesters, and quite a few of them heading your direction at about 5:45, when we had to cut away immediately because of what happened on the bridge in Minneapolis. I know we don't have the video to show, but can you describe what that looked like? Because it looked like it was a very large crowd and a very peaceful crowd making their way towards you at that time when we had to cut away.
Yeah, Randy, I think maybe 5 to 10 seconds later, they all started to march down. And as I had mentioned at the time, there were people lining up to see them. And it was a crowd of about 1,500. That was the estimate from the police department. And that was a very peaceful march. And they started at the state capitol here and were spread out across the whole lawn. You saw several thousand people at that time, and then as they started to march on the streets and on the highways, they walked for 4 to 5 miles and kind of made their way back to the state capitol. Some of them went off to the governor's mansion. Very peaceful, very lively and passionate. And then right around 8 o'clock, we came back here. We probably got here at 7:50, and there was a group of maybe 100 people. Immediately at 8 o'clock, with the show of force that we saw, everybody started to go home. We saw this sort of pop up at about 9:15, and we're starting to see people actually, it's hard for me to tell because it's dark. It looks like, are they either voluntarily walking away? Well, I know I see some St. Paul police officers right in front of that military equipment. It looks like our photographer, David Peterlins, is seeing state troopers that are escorting some people off. So yeah, we've got some people that are being arrested. Yeah, I got some people that are being arrested over here.
Yeah, but again, it appears very peaceful.
Like
that there's not, that there doesn't seem to be any physical altercations or anything.
Right. Yeah, and there hasn't been necessarily use of force, and I think that's important to point out. That I think it was interesting. I think the enforcement aspect of this is interesting because when they were standing across the street, there was no threat whatsoever. It wasn't until they really, came face to face that the police started to think, okay, well, maybe we need to deal with this. So it's very strategic, and we had kind of heard some yells and some things that were being yelled from across the street, but we haven't seen it compared to the scene in Minneapolis. This has been the complete opposite, and this is the first time we're even seeing really any interaction after curfew between law enforcement and the protesters, people that are here.
All right, thank you, Danny, very much. Let's go back over to Minneapolis in the Bobby and Steve's area. Lauren Lemanchuk is reporting live from there. Lauren?
Well, you guys, the arrests here continue. We moved up and got a little better vantage point. I'm going to let Adam pan over and see. Only a handful of people still remaining. The arrests are peaceful. They are orderly. They have filled what looks like 2 vans, and they have a bus here to take these protesters away. You guys were talking about what was going on earlier, and I think that that's an important note because as I've talked to a lot of these protesters, many of them were on 35W this afternoon when that tanker rolled up into the crowd. They were a part of that. Few of them were emotional about it. They said, that man tried to kill us. Now, we'll let police say we don't know the motive, but to them, there was an attempt on their life today. They continued protesting at US. Oh, we just heard flashbangs. Flashbangs, tear gas canisters.
Towards downtown?
Yeah, that's over on Boyd's. No, that's over on the other side of the Washington Avenue Bridge, toward where Boyd is. And we've heard those periodically. We heard about 4 or 5 back to back. But with these protesters, And they weren't deterred. They said, listen, we are here for a message tonight. We are here for George Floyd. I talked to many people who were local. I talked to one woman who was here from Los Angeles with a group. I did ask her, were you guys a part of any of the looting, the unrest that has been blamed on out-of-town groups? She said no. She said that they're not for that. They're against that, but that they had come from out of town to be part of these protests. So, you know, this is how their day started, with a protest. Oh, that was a firework. That was a firework. So their day, these folks that you're seeing being arrested right now, their day started with that peaceful protest in Minneapolis. Many of them, it continued onto 35W to shut down the highway, and continued with that tanker rolling through their crowd. And then they wound up back at US Bank Stadium, back on the highway there, and now pinned inside this Bobby and Steve's gas station and arrested. And as I was talking to them, I got the sense that for many of them, if they were arrested, they were okay with that. That was what they were going to do tonight to make their point that things need to change, and that was why they were out here tonight. Of course, I would say the group was about 150 strong at one point. We think about half of them probably did get away, either left when police asked them to, or left with the first round of police coming up with the tear gas and the flashbangs, and then the rest tried to stay together and wound up pinned in this parking lot. Now there have been dozens of arrests, and again, I believe that was a firework that you just heard. It's kind of unnerving when people are setting off fireworks and you're in the middle of a protest scene, but that's, you know, we're hearing different things. From across the bridge, we obviously heard those 5 quick bangs. We heard a couple protesters, or a couple fireworks from over in the direction of US Bank Stadium, where Gordon's at that protest. And so we're keeping an eye on the situation right now, but this appears to be almost wrapped up here.
There was and we can't see it right now, but there was a bus that was parked, I believe, to your right on Washington Avenue they were, I'm assuming, putting these people in there. There it is right there. Is that what those are being used for?
Yep. Yes. There have been 2 police vans and that bus, or two like sort of cargo vans and that bus.
Yeah.
And then a city bus back there. So they have a lot of people that they're putting in. We estimate dozens are probably being arrested and put into these buses right now. It's been an incredibly orderly process. The people knelt down, they got on the ground, they have been handcuffed, they're brought over, their pockets are checked. Police are taking their information, then putting them on those buses, and we assume taking them somewhere to be booked and processed. As I should point out, it was tweeted out earlier that most of these folks are going to be arrested on on charges of ignoring that curfew, which is a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor offense. And that is the charge most of these people out here, these protesters, are going to face tonight.
And Lauren, just explain what that means for people. Will they spend the night in jail? How does that work?
You know, it's unclear what they're going to do in this case. In most cases, the misdemeanor offense is you know, far less serious than a felony offense. It does not carry jail time generally. It often carries a fine. And so that's what people are facing here. For a gross misdemeanor, you might face up to a year in jail, I think. But in general, you know, this is a relatively minor charge that people are going to face that will more than likely come with a monetary fine. Whether or not they'll spend the night in jail and have to be bailed out, that I don't know. But at this point, the arrests, like I said, have been orderly. You can see them still in there. There's still some protesters in there being arrested, but the numbers are dwindling.
For those who are just tuning in to us, or maybe in the last 45 minutes, we should point out that you were with this group at the corner of Washington Avenue and the entrance to 35W, right there at Bobby and Steve's, which we see. You were in the middle, and you were actually, for a time, trapped in that parking lot along with a lot of other people. You and your photographer showing us people trying to jump the fence and you know, basically trapped in that parking lot. Describe what that scene was like, because for about a couple of minutes, it was pretty frantic.
It was, Randy. And, you know, we started with this group back at US Bank Stadium. They marched up Washington Avenue. They were here blocking the bridge at 35W, which you can see over there. They went onto the highway, and then they faced off, essentially, with police who were there. They had them blocked in on the highway. They forced them back up. And then we felt the tear gas. We heard the canisters. We certainly could feel it and taste it in the air. We had flashbangs, and people were sort of running around, didn't know where to go, and then for a long time they were standing off here on Washington Avenue, and that's when police just moved in from all directions. Eventually everyone did get pinned in Bobby and Steve's because They tried to jump the fence. They tried to go a different direction. Everywhere they went, they ran into police. Now, at one point, we were going to try and follow them at one point to essentially get away because we didn't want to be certainly trapped in an area where there was tear gas and rubber bullets. We were told by police officers, nope, we're coming at you. So at that point, we started holding up these press passes that we all have. We wear them around because the media is allowed to be out here. Officers directed us where to go, and we sort of cleared out the area, and then they surrounded the protesters. So that's what it was. I mean, it was a hairy scene. It was probably only about 5 minutes or so that people were really running in all directions trying to escape. And during that time, everywhere they went, they were blocked off with another group of police officers.
Lauren, great reporting. Thank you very much. I want to take a minute here and talk about the truck, the tanker truck that really started all of this going chaotic. If we can roll that video, if we have it, then I have a statement to read from the trucking company itself. This happened on 35W on the bridge. There were so many protesters on the bridge earlier today, this organized march that started at US Bank Stadium. And then all of a sudden, this tanker truck, and this is kind of the end of it here, I know we have other video, just started rolling towards the protesters. The horn blaring, but not stopping. And we've seen a couple of different videos. We're going very, and you can see it trying to move there again, you know, heading towards the protesters, and them just completely then, some of them engulfing the cab, pulling the driver out of the cab. He was injured. Police were there in a very short period of time, and we've heard from a couple of people that there were some protesters who were in that area that held some people back or helped the driver so that he could be detained so that police could arrest him, and police did. He was taken to HCMC with injuries. He was later released, and he's now in custody. I don't know if we can show the other video, the traffic. Here it is. This is the traffic cam video of earlier today. And, you know, the protesters had somewhat of some warning because he was blaring the horn. We also heard a report that there were some motorcyclists that also kind of warned those protesters something was coming. This happened, I believe, around 5:45. Let me read you this statement from, I believe it's pronounced Keenan Advantage Group out of North Canton, Ohio. It says, "Our hearts go out to all of those who are grieving the events of this past week. We have been informed of an incident involving one of our independent contractors in Minneapolis during recent protests. Our first and foremost concern is for the safety and security of the public, our employees, and our customers. We will be cooperating fully with the investigating authorities in the days ahead. It would be inappropriate to comment at this time until we have additional facts, as the investigation is in its early stages. We will comment further once we have more information." Again, that is from the trucking company talking about one of their independent contractors. It says in Minneapolis, so I guess I can only base that on that this person is based here in Minneapolis, or maybe they're saying that the incident happened in Minneapolis, one or the other. Anyway, we wanted to show you that again and get that statement out so that you had a chance to get you that. Let's go to Boyd real quick. Boyd has been in that Washington Avenue Bridge area across the street from Bobby and Steve's on a rooftop. Obviously, it's dark now, hard to see a lot of things, but Boyd, give us an update.
Well, those flashing lights off to your left are parked near where Lauren is right now, where those arrests are taking place. But, you know, it struck me, there's some symbolism here. Those protesters who are being arrested, their night is done, and they are being silenced tonight. But the message isn't being silenced. One of the things that they were chanting throughout the day as we covered this peaceful parade through Minneapolis, they were chanting, "Say his name, George Floyd, say his name, George Floyd." And his name is being spoken loudly and in lights on that vertical marquee at the Guthrie Theater tonight. course, the Guthrie has been closed because of COVID-19. Normally they would display their productions on that marquee, but tonight George Floyd's name is in bright lights on that beautiful blue vertical marquee at the Guthrie Theater. And especially as the sunset tonight, and it was a beautiful sunset, by the way, but those lights and that marquee became more prominent. And I would think those people who are honoring the memory of George Floyd and grieving for the loss of that man whose life was taken would appreciate this gesture, I would think, by the Guthrie Theater tonight.
You bet. Boyd, any sort of update on those protesters that were in the Seven Corners area? Have we seen any more
Yeah,
activity?
and we'll swing over, Randy. This fairly large contingent of officers is still here, and there are some protesters who are still down Washington Avenue that they've been keeping an eye on now for well over an hour. We just heard another volley of some sort of non-lethal engagement. The sort of sound that we hear when a car makes a turn down a street that they shouldn't be going down, and they'll fire a non-lethal round at the car and they'll back up. It was that sort of sound. We have heard flashbang grenades also being shot down that street. We saw tear gas being shot down that street earlier, and that's being directed at a relatively small group of protesters, as best as we can tell. And I walked down there a while ago, and but they haven't dispersed, and they have been loud at times, chanting, and that's what this fairly large group of law enforcement officers have their attention trained on at this time, even as just across the overpass, those arrests are still taking place.
Okay. Boyd, I appreciate that. You stay with that. Let us know if that situation changes. We also have, Gordon was following a group of protesters that were marching in downtown Minneapolis away from U.S. Bank Stadium, and we don't have an update on that as yet. Do we want to go back to Danny real quick over at the state capitol? Can somebody give me a little bit of direction just so I'm not throwing it someplace different? Okay, let's go back to Danny real quick. Danny?
Hey, Randy, we've got some arrests of a small group of people here at the Minnesota State Capitol. You can see people that have what looks like ties on their hands behind their back, and they're being escorted into law enforcement vehicles, taken to the law enforcement center in custody. This has not been a confrontational scene. I don't want to make it seem like it was confrontational, but there was a small group of people that approached the heavily fortified state capitol just about 10-15 minutes ago, and then police responded, probably 8 different law enforcement vehicles, and began taking people into custody, and probably more than between a half dozen and a dozen arrests. It's hard for me to tell exactly, but people are being taken into custody for what appears to be curfew violations. But as I mentioned, it wasn't a confrontational scene, although there were people that were saying things to the members of the National Guard and the State Patrol, and it became face-to-face at a certain point after staying away for about an hour and a half. Eventually it reached the point to where there was that close physical encounter, not a physical encounter, but they were physically close to the law enforcement. Police decided to step in and take some people into custody. So you can see right now, people have been asking, some of the members of law enforcement have been asking the people that are being taken into custody if they want any of their personal items. They're communicating with them about their cell phones and IDs, and have been trying to just sort of take care of those official things. And we actually spoke to one person being arrested, and I said, was this something you were prepared for? Were you prepared to be taken into custody? And she said, yeah, I knew there was a possibility, but she said she wanted to remain peaceful and just kind of ride out the protests as long as she could. But because of the state order, she's not technically allowed to be on public streets in St. Paul or Minneapolis past 8 o'clock. And so now that we're approaching the 10 o'clock hour, the police decided to enforce that, and she was taken into custody.
All right, very good. Danny, we appreciate that. Stay with that if you can. We want to check in now with Miles Kipper. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. He is on the phone, and he was on the bridge when that tanker went right through that large group of protesters. Is it Miles? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and it is Miles. That's correct.
Miles, thanks for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I don't know if we can show the video, either I'm talking to my producers now, the traffic cam. Is this Miles' video that we're looking at? Somebody can tell me in my ear? Oh, thank you. All right, so Miles, tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, sure. So I was out in the protest for the whole time taking pictures, and as we were kneeling in the crowd, we heard a horn and a revving engine, and I look up camera in hand to see this semi barrel into our group of protesters. In the picture that we're looking at, it's a protester who climbed up on the window to stop him. And the video that is currently playing is this truck getting mobbed, him trying to back up over protesters, and then just driving forward, I think out of fear for his own life. And I don't know any motives besides that.
Okay. Just describe this scene as you're videotaping, and there they pulled him out. Describe what were you thinking when you started shooting this video?
I started shooting this video thinking that I was going to record this guy running over protesters. I killed some of the people who are out there peacefully.
Yeah.
And as it progressed and I saw him get pulled out of the cab, I realized immediately that this was going to be a video of a guy getting beat to death. We could hear him screaming. You could hear the crowd screaming. And I thought they were going to throw him over the side of the over the side of the bridge.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when we saw that.
Yeah, so as my camera cut, that was the time that I ran into the fray and joined a line of I don't know how many other protesters, but we stood the line and we protected that guy.
Describe that scene. What was that like? I mean, we saw that from our chopper. We did see people trying to keep other people back and somewhat under control. Describe that scene.
Sure. I'm in that video. I have a bike helmet on. I'm on the left side. And, I'm a rugby player, so being in a scrum is not something I'm a stranger to. And it felt very much like an angry scrum with a team of really angry people punching and kicking and screaming bloody murder, and a tight group of protesters who are out there for the right reason, screaming that this isn't what the movement's about. We can't hurt this guy. If we kill him, we're screwed.
Right.
It was tense. I have no idea how long it lasted. I have no idea how long we were in there.
Well, it wasn't very long, Miles, to be honest with you. Once he was pulled out, the people that were there trying to protect him so that he wasn't hurt as badly as he was, it wasn't that long before the police showed up. And then, did you guys then deliver the driver to the police?
We delivered the driver to the police, yes, and we all got maced at the end. I'm actually not that mad about it because I think the police were entering a really scary situation.
Absolutely.
I think everybody was in a really emotionally tense and scary situation, which is kind of where we've been all week. And it could have gone a lot of ways. I'm really happy that no one got killed and no one got seriously hurt.
It's funny you say that because when we were watching this all take place on live TV, and the police, I think there were 3 squads that first showed up in that area. They were completely outnumbered. I mean, there's just no doubt about it that could have turned ugly in so many different ways. And obviously can't fault the police for using that type of protection for themselves. Did you by chance, when you were standing there, because all we see is the aftermath of the truck being stopped, did you hear the horn? I mean, could you hear people screaming, get out of the way? What did you hear?
And talk to other people about it because it was a traumatic experience and I want to remember it accurately. The best of my recollection, we were all kneeling on the freeway. We stood up and moved 10 to 15 yards further south on 35 and kneeled again. At that point, I heard screaming coming from the far side of the crowd along with a honking horn and a revving engine. And at first you feel like you see this in videos, but it's not here. And then I look up. I was with my wonderful girlfriend who was a few feet in front of me, and I scared her half to death. And this truck scared her half to death as we fled for our lives because no one knows what this guy's coming for. And he deliberately swerved towards the median, towards protesters, is what it looked like from my perspective. As he came in, everybody parted like the Red Seas, and people scattered. I have no idea why he stopped.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk that the truck was leaking gas. That is not correct. People were throwing water bottles at it, as far as I could tell, and I was there for a while. I have pictures. There was no gas leak.
Yeah.
We weren't in danger of getting blown up. It was just danger of this dude trying to squish us for whatever reason, and it was terrifying.
Do me a favor and describe him. What white, African American?
He was a white male, probably 5'8" or 5'10", skinny guy with glasses on. I have pictures of him through the windshield, looking terrified.
Yeah.
And I have a recollection of seeing him curled in a fetal ball, screaming bloody murder for his life as people kicked him in the head. So I didn't really get a good look at him.
How many of you stepped in to try to prevent that the crowd from absolutely pummeling this guy?
You know, I was aware of the guy on the left of me and the guy on the right of me, and I don't have a good awareness of what was going on much past that, but I would estimate 8 or 10. And yeah, it felt, I had no idea where the end was.
Yeah.
We just stood there trying to save this guy's life as he tried to get away and screamed and crawled behind us. And as endless waves of people tried to reach through us to deliver some rightful justice, because a lot of these people almost got run over. A lot of these people's kids were there. A lot of these people's wives were there. I understand why people were so mad, but a man being murdered is what started all of this. People standing by and watching somebody be killed by another group is why we're all in the situation we're in right now. You know, my family has a really long history in Minneapolis. We were a red line family. We moved across a red line. My grandpa served in World War II and migrated here from Paris, Missouri. My uncle is a community leader, and my dad is a world-renowned musician. We were born and bred in Minneapolis. We have a lot of history here. And I can't stand by and watch our city be torn apart. And I can't stand by and watch us look like a bunch of jerks
Yeah.
in the national media, because this isn't who we are.
Right. Talk about describe your, I mean, what a lot of people would turn and run, and we saw a lot of people turn and run, and not knowing the situation. There were a lot of people that didn't. Why you? Why did you decide to be one of those people to step in and stop this from happening to this guy to the point where he could be arrested and taken into custody?
As I stated, people standing by and doing nothing is why we are in the situation we're in. I've been at these protests every day, every night. I've been out there with my camera, and I've been out there trying to share what I'm seeing and share both sides of this. And for me at that point to turn and run, if that guy would have died and I would have been there, I would never forgive myself.
Well, this is about 4 hours after all of this has happened, and we certainly do appreciate you coming on, sharing this video with us, and more than that, sharing the perspective of what it was like down there when all of this took place. And like I said, we really do thank you, Miles, for joining us tonight. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Randy. I appreciate it.
You bet. Let's jump down to Carla Holt. She's down at the Government Center. This is where Gordon Severson was earlier, and here's Carla right now. Carla?
Yeah, actually, hi there, Randy. We are now on Portland Avenue, far south of the Government Center. We've been walking along Portland Avenue along with hundreds of people. You can see basically it's like a walking parade as well as a driving parade of people who are continuing the protest. You can see a lot of people out here. Still a very diverse group now. The age diversity not so strong anymore as what we saw earlier in the day with the other protests. But a lot of people still here, some people even on bikes, a lot of people obviously in cars, carrying signs, continuing to chant, continuing to try to carry on their messages. Now, I did talk to several of them about the fact that it is after curfew and that the governor has in fact ordered people to go home at 8 o'clock. And they said simply that until and unless the 3 other officers who were involved in the George Floyd incident are also facing charges, they will continue to protest at all hours. They also added that these were a couple of protests, a few of them, I should say, that I talked with earlier. They also added that they really felt that the police, that by facing them at inadvertent times, that they weren't necessarily following the protocol and the quarantine and the curfew rules themselves. So given that, they felt they could also break them. But as you can see, it's a pretty diverse group. And it is, I want to emphasize this, we have seen no signs of violence at this point. Just a lot of people, breaking the curfew, to be clear, definitely breaking the curfew, but walking along Portland Avenue and creating a bit of a pedestrian and also car traffic situation. You can hear it.
All right. Thank you so much, Carla, reporting for us from Portland Avenue. We've had Alex Hagan. He's been out at the site of George Floyd's arrest at 38th and Chicago for hours now at an incredibly hopeful and inspiring, it has been a hopeful and inspiring day there. And I understand, Alex, that you spoke with the police chief, Medario Arredondo, earlier today.
Yep. Yeah, we spoke with the chief actually just a little bit ago, and as you said, it's been a very peaceful day out here at 38th in Chicago. And actually, you can see here a lot of people still here, of course, the 8 o'clock curfew, but we haven't seen any real police presence or anybody enforcing that curfew. But again, as you said, the chief stopped by, so that was really the only police officer to come by here, and he was talking to some of the folks, and he wasn't here for that long, but I want to toss to a quick soundbite of what he had to say about his reasoning for coming out here today.
Yeah, I'm out here first and solely just to pay my deepest respects to Mr. Floyd and certainly his family and his loved ones, and so I said a prayer, and this is very personal for me, and so that's why I'm out here.
So yeah, he was out here for just a little bit of time, as he said, just paying his respects to George Floyd, and he said a prayer. He also had a couple of conversations with the folks out here, and they had some questions for him. He said he was out here to maybe learn from what happened and see and engage with the community and hear their concerns about what happened and try and make the situation better, so to speak. So again, he wasn't out here very long, but again, coming out here for the first time just to pay his respects to George Floyd, talk to some of the folks out here, hear their concerns, and try and make change and make the situation better. Send it back to you.
Yeah, Alex, and I know the day started there and for you earlier with a church service, and we'd talked to you earlier today, and there were so many people there that were just trying to spread a message of hope and unity and healing, and we don't want that to get lost in all of this of what we're seeing right now. After the sun goes down. Can you share a little bit of what you heard from those people who gathered there today?
Yeah, this was, and Julie, we've been coming to me during these the peaceful gatherings here and sharing that unity and that gathering. There's one gentleman I spoke to, as you remember, he said, "We are one." Talked to the pastor who held the church service, and he was sharing his message, which was a message of hope and peace and healing and just push for change with the power of God. And he invited everybody out here. There were people coming from all over the area coming here to pay their respects. And you can hear some people chanting here George Floyd's name, but people have just been here peacefully chanting his name, George Floyd, just coming together as a community to learn or to make this situation better, push for change, and push for this to never happen again. And that has been the message throughout the day. And the chief trying to be a part of that as well, I guess, when he talked to the folks today.
All right. Alex, thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing the perspective from 38th in Chicago. Danny Spiewak is at the state capitol where much earlier in the day there were a huge crowd had gathered for justice for George Floyd. And there's also, we should note, a huge National Guard presence protecting the state capitol throughout the day and tonight. Danny, what are you seeing there?
Well, Julie, the strategy to fortify the Minnesota State Capitol has worked this evening. We just saw about a half dozen arrests just about a half hour ago, but other than that, it's been an extremely quiet night with just a huge law enforcement presence here in front of the Minnesota State Capitol, a sight you rarely ever see here, something we haven't seen in recent memory. But you have the National Guard, members of the Minnesota State Patrol and the Wisconsin State Patrol. People have been guarding the roof for most of the day. There was a large crowd here earlier, way before curfew, starting around noon, with a rally that took up the entire lawn of the Capitol. After 3 or 4 hours, they began marching through the streets of downtown St. Paul, onto the highway, back to the streets of St. Paul, came back to the Capitol. Just before curfew at about 8, there were a couple of hundred people that were standing pretty close to the members of law enforcement, but there really weren't any major skirmishes of any sort. And then it was quiet for about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, and there was a small group of people sitting across the street quietly. At some point, they decided to come up and kind of get physically close to the members of the National Guard and other members of law enforcement, and they were arrested. We saw about 8 different squad cars show up and peacefully took them into custody. There was no real confrontation. I don't want to make it seem like they had to use any force. They led some people off with their hands tied behind their backs, and we actually spoke with one of the protesters who was being arrested. She was very calm, and then I asked her if this was something that she anticipated would happen, breaking curfew, and she said she knew it was a real possibility, but that she wanted to just basically protest as long as she could, get her message out there, continuing to call for the prosecution of the 3 other officers in the George Floyd case, and decided to do it as long as she could until police decided to step in and enforce the curfew violation by state order.
All right, Danny, thank you so much for the update from St. Paul at the state capitol there. We are seeing now that there are some reports coming across social media from the Minneapolis police. They just tweeted out that they have been dispatched to a report of looting at a Habitat for Humanity house. We do have a crew on the way there. And we know that last night they really kept this looting to a minimum. If it happened last night, I don't know that we were even aware that it was happening, but reports of this and an increase in reports of cars without license plates in the St. Paul area, at least. I haven't seen anything crossing really about that in Minneapolis, but we do know that officers have been pulling over any cars they see without license plates, and they have been finding things like accelerants and weapons that could be used to wreak havoc in the Twin Cities. And we also heard from the Department of Public Safety's commissioner that they've been finding people had been leaving accelerants at various places around the Twin Cities, planting them in different spots. And so they've been coming across that. And of course, if you see anything suspicious, they are asking that you report that to them, making it really reinforcing that feeling that the discord that we've seen and the higher levels of violence that we saw play out across the Twin Cities the last few nights have been coordinated, thought out efforts, at least some of it thought out in advance, not necessarily a spontaneous a turn of these crowds. But of course, speaking of crowds, they are trying desperately to get people to go home now that we're 2 hours past curfew, so that they can get a better handle on those who would do harm to the city versus those who are just trying to use their voice for change. We have a press conference with the governor coming up again at 10:30 tonight, and we will take you there live as soon as that happens. At the last press conference, if you're just joining us within the last couple hours, the governor announced that he has appointed Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, to take over the criminal case against former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who put his knee on George Floyd's neck. So that case has now been transferred over to the Attorney General's office, which is something that the protesters had been demanding. They had wanted it taken out of the hands of the Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman, and we just had that announcement a few hours ago that is in fact what has happened, and Keith Ellison, in conjunction with the Hennepin County Attorney, will be leading that investigation. We've been watching a lot of different scenes play out, clusters of protesters, large presence of police officers and troopers and guard members that will come in and surround them. It has all been playing out fairly peacefully. Occasionally they are deploying tear gas to get people to move in a certain direction. But there have been a lot of arrests tonight, and we didn't see as many last night, but they're basically getting these people surrounded by law enforcement, telling them to get down on the ground, and then just one by one arresting them. I believe this is Boyd's camera that we're looking at right now. And Boyd, if you can hear me, what's the scene there right now?
You know, it really seems like officers are kind of standing down. They were all in formation on Washington Avenue. This would be just east of 35W. But they're definitely not at the attention that they were. And that group of protesters I just checked, if there were a couple of dozen earlier when I looked, and there must be a way for them to leave, and maybe that's the intention here. Maybe the intention is not to arrest them, but just to let them go home, because that group of protesters is much smaller. It was just a few people left standing there, and the officers who've been watching them they seem to be much more relaxed now too. And Deb, if we can look down at the ramp here too, I don't know if there's a better sight on a night like this in the city of Minneapolis than all these citizen soldiers, these National Guard members, just relaxing.
Yeah, that's what we want to see.
Taking a break.
Yeah.
Right, and
sure.
you know, you would assume that if there were hot spots in the city tonight, that these guys would be active. Guys and women would be active, and they're not. And same with the officers up on the bridge. There are, you know, a dozen squad cars up on the Washington Avenue bridge as those arrests were being taken care of, and they're doing the same. They seem to be waiting for their next assignment, or yeah, taking a break. And it's a beautiful night out here, and what better thing could they be doing than that tonight?
And Boyd, I thought it was so powerful when you showed the Guthrie Theater, just that beautiful shot of downtown Minneapolis and the Guthrie Theater just streaming George Floyd's name. It's just such a juxtaposition to some of the violence we've seen a few nights ago. Just a gorgeous shot of our city, and I agree with you. It's awfully nice to see them in a more relaxed position. We know things can change quickly, and we saw that last night as well, where there'd be a cluster of law enforcement officers seemingly just standing on a corner, and all of a sudden they would lift their weapons again. Non-lethal weapons, to be clear, with tear gas canisters and whatnot, but it can change very quickly. So we're very thankful for a respite there where you are right now.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think about people over the past few days. I was at home for much of that on vacation, coming back into work now. And sitting at home, I'm sure I was like a lot of other people. I couldn't go to bed because you couldn't turn away. And it's emotionally draining and tiring the next day. And I'm sure a lot of people experience that. And this is Sunday night now, and people are going to be getting up and going back to work in the morning. And we hope and pray that this continues through the night, and these Guard members can stay here and relax, and that they're not needed elsewhere in the city for looting and fires and the kinds of things that we've been seeing the past previous nights.
That's right, and I know you're voicing what a lot of people are feeling. There's a weariness and an exhaustion, both emotionally and physically, because I've heard from so many people that say they just couldn't sleep and haven't been able to for the last few nights, and no idea really where's the end. We don't know if there's an end in sight to the increased military presence and the need for it in the Twin Cities. We will be hearing again from the governor in about 20 minutes. But in the past, when we've had these kind of peaceful protests, or protests that even turned contentious, and there were skirmishes between police and the people that were standing right in front of them, there was a sense that it went for a few days, and then things went back to normal. And we don't get a sense of that with this. We're just not sure how long this is going to last, but we do know that a lot of you who are watching right now are weary, and we feel the same way, because it is an emotionally gut-wrenching thing to watch unfold in your city. And even the fact that the law enforcement was able to regain control last night, it still saddens you to see this type of a military presence in your city. And Randy, when we're talking about the fact that, you know, this is the Seven Corners area, this is Bobby and Steve's, these are areas we all know and love, and And so to see all this unfold is something that none of us will forget. This is an unprecedented time here in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota.
I think the thing that strikes me today is how many different directions this thing could have gone and how badly it could have gone and how fortunate that it didn't and how fortunate we are that when people were arrested tonight after the curfew, they were peaceful. We haven't seen any incidents. We haven't seen any, looting. We haven't seen any fires. We haven't seen protesters fight back. We're so lucky and thankful that that tanker didn't hit anybody, didn't kill anybody. I mean, there's just so many different ways that this thing could have gone today, and it started so fantastic, so beautiful with all these tributes and the service over at 38th and Chicago this morning and all of the peaceful protests that we've been following all day long. It could have been so tragic, and it's just thank goodness that it did not turn out that way.
Carla Holt's at the government center right now. There are still groups of protesters out.
I don't have any IFB.
And I don't know if you can hear us, but Carla, if you can hear us, you're live.
Okay, yes, I got you now. Hi, you guys. We are right now just approaching 38th and Chicago, where you've seen other action today, but we were following Portland Avenue south for several blocks, probably maybe even a mile and a half, 2 miles, with this group. Now, they've been doing a parade of sorts, both on foot and in cars. And Craig, if you can just show, they're essentially lined up in their automobiles, and they have signs and they have flags, and obviously they are honking as well. And so they are saying to us, I hope you can still hear me at this point. They are saying that this is peaceful, but they are violating curfew because they will not stop until the other 3 officers involved in the George Floyd case are also facing charges. So that is what we've heard from several protesters here tonight. Again, I asked them point blank, I said, this is in violation of curfew. There have been several peaceful demonstrations, but law enforcement and the governor have also asked for everyone to go home as of 8 o'clock, but they said that they need to push beyond that time frame just to truly make their point. But again, peaceful at this point, but a large gathering. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not seeing a lot of law enforcement here right now, but it is quite calm and very peaceful. I'll send it back to you, though.
All right, thank you so much, Carla. And it's interesting to point out that it's hard to have eyes on all the different locations in the Twin Cities. Obviously, still a lot of people out near the government center where Carla Holt is reporting live for us tonight. We have just received into the newsroom a mugshot of the truck driver who we believe is the one who was on 35W tonight. These are the official records from the Hennepin County Jail showing that the truck driver involved in today's incident is 35-year-old Bogdan Vechirko. Vechirko, I'm guessing, is how you say his name. You see it there on his screen. And he is being held on an assault charge. And Randy, I thought your interview with Miles was so powerful. As I look at this mugshot, and I think back to the video that we were watching of people pulling him out of that cab, it is amazing that it looks like he has a few marks to his face. And to hear that young man say that the way this whole thing started was with somebody dying, and he was going to make sure that another person did not die on that interstate tonight, I found incredibly moving. Here's that video, if you hadn't seen it, of that truck just inexplicably going down 35W when it was filled, as you can see, with thousands of people.
But Miles' video, which is from which he shared with us, is right there next to the truck, and his description of what they did in pulling this truck driver out of the cab and starting to beat him. As Miles described, he was screaming for his life, basically, in a fetal position. And as Miles described, there were 3, 4, 5 people who tried to pull him out of that group and basically, there's the video. Basically, well, this isn't Miles' video, but basically save him so that he could be arrested by law enforcement. And as you described, Julie, and as he described, this is how this whole thing started, with someone dying at the hands in police custody, and he didn't want to see another person die because of the actions of people that obviously very angry and scared at this moment. I can't even imagine all of the emotions that you go through. This, I believe,
Yep,
is
that's his
Miles'
video.
video right here. There'll be a guy that jumps up on the front of this truck and starts kicking in the glass to basically stop the truck from moving. It's coming up, I believe, pretty quick here. There he is. And to try to stop the driver of the truck from moving it any further. It is a miracle that no one was hurt, at least that we know of, was hurt in this incident on 35W. If you saw this video, you saw the number of people that were on that bridge at that time. It could have been an incredible tragedy. So.
And according to the Hennepin County Jail records, this is the driver who's 35 years old who was behind the wheel of that truck. We can't explain why he was on the interstate. We were hearing from the Department of Public Safety that he somehow got on the interstate as they were closing it down. This all happened around 5:45 tonight. Everything had been incredibly peaceful. Many, many protests, thousands of people, very peaceful. They were on the interstate, but Randy very importantly pointed out that they had let authorities know that would be part of their route. So authorities, according to the commissioner, and he did say this is all very early, and we'll be getting an update here in about 10 minutes from state officials, so maybe they'll have more information, but a lot of questions tonight from all of us, understandably. How did that semi get on the interstate?
Right.
Because they were all supposed to be closed around the Twin Cities at 5 p.m. But even outside of that, a route had been given to authorities. We were aware of what the route would be for these people who wanted to peacefully protest. People have very strong opinions about whether or not you should protest and be able to protest and disrupt things on the interstate. But authorities knew that they would be going this way. So how he got onto the interstate, we do not know. Then there are other people on social media saying he wasn't going that fast, he got lost, he got confused. But we have a video from Boyd Hooper that shows how quickly he entered that crowd. And outside of some sort of medical emergency, it's hard to understand why that would have happened. He was blaring his horn the entire time, according to witnesses. And went through that crowd, and there's other video showing him probably going about 35 or 45 miles per hour. So it's just impossible to understand why he did that, and if it was intentional, and if it wasn't intentional, how in the world it could have happened without him realizing what was happening.
This is a frightening scene, make no mistake about it, and we watched it in real time. Another frightening part of this was when 3 squad cars showed up on that bridge with all of those people out there, and those police officers clearly outnumbered by the group that was on that bridge. But there were people like Miles Kipper who had a hold of this guy to protect him in a lot of ways, well, save his life, basically, to get him to police. And Miles said, you know what, I got pepper sprayed, and I'm okay with it today, because those officers didn't know the situation at all. They were protecting themselves and trying to control that crowd, but they actually delivered this man to police so that they could, first of all, take him to HCMC for his injuries, but then after he was released, arrested, and then charged with assault, as we have found out tonight.
Yeah, and Randy, it really struck me when you were talking to him all these hours later, how emotional he was. I mean, this, for those people that were on this interstate, it was traumatic and scary. And he said, there were women and children, and of course, we will be digging into who this man is and trying to find out more for you about why he ended up on 35W when thousands of protesters were on the interstate. And maybe we'll learn that in about 10 minutes when the governor has his next press conference tonight. But right now we're watching several scenes unfold across the Twin Cities. Carla Holt has been with people who are out past curfew. And we've had Lauren Lemanchek with a group of people over by Bobby and Steve's in 7 Corners. They were just telling them they'd surrounded protesters, told them to sit on the ground, and were just arresting them one by one. We did see the AP is reporting that over the last several days of protests, there have been 4,100 arrested. I'm not sure if that includes every arrest, even outside of breaking curfew or looting or arson, but 4,100 arrested over the last few days since George Floyd's death. We can tell you that there are about 155, I think, from last night. Tonight, that number will be much higher. We did not see these kind of mass arrests going on last night, but it seems to be happening in various places around the Twin Cities right now. The tactic that the police officers are using is to surround people. Here's that video. I believe you'll be able to see how quickly that semi was going when it hit 35
Yeah.
W.
You know, the other thing that, Miles, keep in mind, that's a split in the two interstates, north and south. That's a drop right there. They're not connected. So the people that are on one side can't get to the other side. And my fear, as we were watching this in real time, is somebody's going to throw him over the side.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, who knows what was going to happen, but, you know, there is that split where, you know, somebody could have been injured or even trying to get out of the way of that tanker and, you know, over the side. I mean, it's just, there's so many things, so many variables that could have made this incredibly tragic, that so lucky that it didn't.
So that was unfolding at about 5:45 tonight. Up until that point, everything had been incredibly calm and peaceful. What we're seeing happening right now is police and other law enforcement using a tactic of surrounding protesters. There are various groups around the Minneapolis anyway right now where there are still people protesting. And the tactic that the police were using was to surround them and then once they are surrounded, ask them to sit down, and then they go down the line one by one and arrest them. I know we were at outside the Capitol with Danny Spiewak earlier. He saw the same thing happen there. He said a couple hundred people, and they were arrested, but there has been no violence between them and police. I know we're trying to get you a live shot right now of what's happening in this moment at 10:23. We have been kind of looking from a bird's eye view at 35W, at Bobby and Steve's in that area of Seven Corners. And there had been a couple different groups there. Lauren was with one. They were being arrested, and that scene may be cleared at this point, I don't know. And then Boyd was watching another scene play out where basically the protesters and law enforcement were just standing and facing each other. And nothing had happened there yet. No arrests had been made. But Carla Holt, near the government center with a group of very active protesters. Let's see what's going on where Lauren Lambanchek has been stationed. It was a really active night near Lauren earlier. Lauren, do you know if they've cleared that area yet? What's happening there?
There's more law enforcement here than anyone else. The situation at Bobby and Steve's appears to be over. I want you to look behind me right now. This is Washington Avenue, just before the Washington Avenue Bridge, the overpass for 35W. And, you know, it was blocked with protesters before. Police are not going to let that happen again. You can see the huge presence here blocking off this area. And then periodically a car will start to come down Washington Street, will not turn around fast enough, and we'll hear the rubber bullets fired in the direction of that car. So you can see a lot of law enforcement here. Now, if you turn us around for a second, my photographer's going to turn around, Adam's turning. You can see there's the Bobby and Steve's. Police still there in the parking lot, but the protesters, I believe nearly all of them are gone. They filled up 2 large vans, a bus full of them, dozens, we believe, were arrested here. Just a short while ago, the last of those buses drove away, and the people on board were the people who've been arrested, cheering and chanting as they went away. So this for them was a moment of civil disobedience, I think. But what happened at the time was, you know, many of them were part of that group that was on I-35 when the tanker came through. They regrouped afterwards. They met at US Bank Stadium. They marched back to 35W and were on the highway again. When police cleared them off then, they used flashbangs, they used tear gas, and many of the protesters ran away. Many of them stayed here sort of in a standoff with police, and that's when that surround tactic happened. They would officers would move in, they would try and run away. In every direction that they would turn, they would hop a fence, the police would be there. And finally, they got them rounded up in that Bobby and Steve's parking lot. And that's when you heard the officers tell them to get down on the ground. They were all going to be arrested. They will face, most of them, misdemeanor charges, according to the tweet that came out from law enforcement tonight. Julie?
All right, Lauren, thank you. And again, we watched that whole scene play out live. And just the lack of tension in the air right now. I'm seeing tweets saying that the people who are waiting to load into those vans and the officers are all chatting and talking, and none of it got face to face anyway, really contentious. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. I'm not sure what the situation is down by the government center. Maybe somebody can tell me in my ear. Okay, Alex at the memorial is what we have. All right, let's go to Alex Hagan. He's at 30. He's been there all day long. Alex has been there all day long, from start to finish, at 38th in Chicago. Alex, what are you seeing right now?
Well, Randy, the last time I talked to you guys, there wasn't many people out here. They were just hanging out, paying their respects to George Floyd. But in the last couple minutes, say 15 minutes, we actually had a large group of demonstrators that one of them told me they were coming from the Dinkytown area. And you can see here behind me, I hope you can see behind me, that there is a much larger group. I believe some of these demonstrators that have come through here are the ones that Carla have been following. So within the last 20 minutes or so, there have been larger crowds coming through here to 38th in Chicago, though it still remains very peaceful. Talked to a gentleman just moments ago. He says they're keeping it peaceful. They're just coming together here, mourning the loss of George Floyd. So fairly, yes, a lot of snacks and for people here all day. But they are just gathering around the circle of flowers that I've been showing you all day, that memorial, chanting his name, no justice, no peace, that we've been hearing all day. Haven't seen any law enforcement. I know that we have been covering several protests throughout the day. The law enforcement have been making their moves on, but so far right now, since these demonstrators came in the area, we haven't seen any police, any law enforcement in the area. Again, this is a sacred place, as people are calling it. I'm not sure if that's making a difference on the matter, but again,
And, Alex, I would ask you though. I'm sorry to interrupt. I know we've got that lag, so
yeah.
it's hard to not interrupt each other. But it doesn't appear that they have damage to that area. Is that still true? That was largely left untouched?
No, this specific intersection, no damage at all. We have seen people come by with brooms, but then people are guiding them to other places.
So how do you feel about it? So how you feel?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm just doing this live shot
I
right
know,
now.
I know you are. But
Well, we have seen.
I'm asking you a question.
We have seen.
All right, Alex,
Okay.
we'll check
Yeah.
back with Alex.
Yeah.
I want to read this tweet. I wonder if we can, while we take other video. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Office just tweeted, this has been one of the most challenging weeks in our community's history. We know most of you are feeling emotionally drained. We are too. But I'll be out on the streets with my deputies tonight and every night to help keep the peace. We are working shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement officers from across the state and the National Guard. It is a unified, organized front with the goal of protecting our community from a violent element bent on destruction. At the same time, all over Hennepin County, we have seen an outpouring of support from citizens that is staggering. People are making sure that streets are cleaned and that those in need are sheltered, clothed, and fed. And on behalf of the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, he said thank you to everyone helping their neighbors in this extraordinarily difficult time. And we saw so much of that today. In fact, there's a middle school, Sanford Middle School, where there was a call for people to drop off groceries, diapers, things that people in this area of the 3rd Precinct particularly that had been decimated by fires, all those small businesses just destroyed, including the Target, the Cub Foods, the places they go to get their medications and their food, had all been destroyed. So there was a call put out. There were so many bags of groceries that we were reporting earlier tonight that 5 semi-loads full of donated food and supplies for people who live in that community. And so while we watch all of this unfold with the law enforcement and arrests being made and talk about the very real threat of violence at times, even last night that we saw, it's important to remember that when the sun has come up in the morning, it has been an inspirational thing to see. How many volunteers have showed up with brooms, how many people have dropped off supplies to help their neighbors. So we were reporting on that earlier today. Once the sun went down, our reporting and the tone of it changed. But we want you to know we've been on the air for hours and we have been talking about those wonderful things that we see every day in our community. We're going to go now live to the governor because he's about to hit the podium, as you can see, and give us an update on the situation across Minneapolis and St. Paul tonight. Let's listen in.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank Minnesotans once again. Vast majority of people honoring the curfew requirements to allow law enforcement to make sure that our city streets remain safe. I do want to just reiterate again, I think many of you, like me, have watched the video of the truck and the peaceful protesters. I am so incredibly thankful. We had no fatalities or no injuries. I just think it highlights the fact again of trying to make sure that we create space and keep the ability to peacefully protest there. And I think over the last 2 days, Minnesota, we've clearly shown a difference between people exercising their First Amendment rights, showing passion to injustices, and trying to make their voice heard, and those that were trying to do something very different. So I'm going to have Paul Snell give some updates on where we're at this point in time. We are seeing very few incidents. I think some folks who got caught after time, some very respectful interactions, and those folks, again, were simply, I think, exercising their rights and got caught behind the curfew, and I'm just grateful how that has panned out so far. So with that, Paul Snell.
Good evening. Thank you, Governor. Just to provide a quick update as to where things are, as you've seen, and as the Governor mentioned, the incident with the truck coming onto the bridge was obviously a significant and great concern when that happened. We had been monitoring the crowd that was involved in that walk. We knew that they were peaceful. There was no real issues. And when the truck came on and the things that evolved and the great deal of concern we had for the safety of everyone in that situation, as you could see plainly that once the truck came in, again, we didn't know exactly at that point in time what the intent was of that truck driver. And then the concern about was anybody hit early on was also a concern. And then obviously the driver was removed from the truck and was assaulted by a number of people. And then I think on the positive note, there was also a large number of people attempting to protect the man who was driving that truck. So, all in all, that situation was, we sent a lot of resources there, as you saw. There was gas deployment that was really about wanting to disperse the crowd, to move people away from the scene. Ultimately, as you saw, officers came in, and it was very slow and methodical, different than you might have saw from a tactical standpoint of last night. But based on what the commanders saw in the group, that the group appeared largely cooperative. We didn't see high levels of resistance at that point in time. Ultimately, you saw the encirclement that happened, about 150 to 200. I don't know the exact number. Again, those people, were involved in acts of civil disobedience, which we respect. They were very respectful in terms of their interactions with officers. It was slow and methodical. This is a textbook kind of response to these type of situations. That they are finalizing that as we speak. As they are doing that, we have moved some resources from St. Paul into Minneapolis to begin to address other areas. While there has not been significant unrest, we have had people out violating the curfew, but based on what we saw them engaged in, we decided to really focus on that area on or near Washington there and address that group. Right now, that will continue. Those efforts will continue as we finalize these arrests and the booking of those arrested out off of Washington. After that, we will again hit hotspots and disperse, get people to get home and comply. But ultimately, we feel very fortunate that that situation on the bridge did not end any more seriously than it was. We were also grateful, as the governor mentioned, that so many people did once again comply with the curfew, which makes a huge difference. As you know, that incident with the truck occurred prior to the implementation of the curfew, which, did create challenges because when the curfew was enacted, but commanders, based upon field observations, made a specific and explicit decision to give focus to that area, to address that group, and ultimately to affect the rest, as you're seeing happening now. So the situation is present stable. The protest at the Capitol during the day was, I think, a large event, largely very peaceful throughout the course of the day. Later this evening,